Hey, what's up guys? I hope you followed along in our study of Daniel chapter 2. But today, before we jump into Revelation chapter 13, let's dive into Daniel chapter 7. So Daniel's got this dream, he's got this vision, so let's read about it. So in this dream, Daniel sees 4 beasts. One of them, the first, is a lion. The second, a bear. The third, a leopard. And the fourth, he doesn't give an animal name. It's just this unimaginable, terrible creature. He calls it this frightening and terrifying, very powerful. It had large iron teeth, and it crushed and devoured its victims. It trampled underfoot what was left. It was different from all the former beasts. So this beast is definitely something different. So let's dive into what these beasts are in part 2. Part 2 of our study in Daniel chapter 7. So we just read in part 1 that Daniel has a vision of these 4 beasts. The first a lion, then a bear, a leopard, and then this unnamed terrifying creature. So if you recall from Daniel chapter 2, we looked at 4 kingdoms and how they were different parts of metal from the statue. We had Babylon, then the Medo-Persians, Greece, and then Rome. And it's the same here. This lion that he sees at first is Babylon. You remember Daniel is in Babylon at the time. So he's predicting these future kingdoms. And the second beast represents the next kingdom, the Medo-Persians. The one after that, the leopard, represents the Greeks. And this terrifying, horrible beast, which some say might be a dragon, it's Rome. That's definitely Rome. This is part 3 of our study in Daniel chapter 7. So in part 2, we just learned what these beasts are and how they represent the kingdoms. And how the first was Babylon, then Medo-Persians, then the Greeks, and now the Romans. So most of this prophecy, most of this dream, this vision, whatever you please, is about the kingdom of Rome and this terrifying beast. So let's talk about it. So first we notice that this beast has 10 horns. And Daniel says in verse 8, "While I was thinking about the horns, there was one before me, a little one, that came up among them and uprooted 3 of the first horns, the first 10 horns, and it had eyes of a human and a mouth that spoke boastfully against God." So let's find out what this all means in part 4. This is part 4 of our study in Daniel chapter 7. So we just read about the beast that represents Rome, and the little horn, and the 10 other horns, 3 of which were uprooted by the little horn. So we can read that the little horn kept speaking boastfully until the beast, that is Rome, was thrown into the fire after being stripped of its authority and being destroyed. So we know that this beast is not eternal, it's not going to last. Rome will fall, Jesus will reign. But it also says in verse 12, the other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a short period of time. So we know that Rome is going to be utterly destroyed. These other 3 beasts, though, they can stick around for a hot sec. Not for long, though. Let's find out more in part 5. Ooh. Part 5 of our study in Daniel chapter 7. So, there's one more part to this prophecy. We just read all the beast stuff, Rome stuff, the little horn, all that. Go watch the other videos first. But there's one more part. It says in verse 13, "In my vision," Daniel's vision, "at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man. Coming up out of the clouds of heaven, he approached the ancient days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, sovereign power. All nations and people of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, and one that will not pass away. His kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." So we know this is Jesus' kingdom, the eternal kingdom. Jesus called himself the Son of Man like 80 some times. So yeah, part 6 next. This is part 6 of our interpretation and our study of Daniel chapter 7. So now we're getting into the interpretation part in Daniel's interpretation. But we know this was written in about 5 to 600 BC, way before the time of Rome, and it's kind of confusing. We know that there will be a revival of the Roman Empire, and that's said to be in these ancient days. So there's three main schools of thought that come along with this chapter. One, that all these prophetic things about the Roman Empire are fulfilled in the first Roman Empire that's already happened. Two, that they're fulfilled in the second Roman Empire that we have not seen yet, this world-conquering empire. And three, that they're in both. And let's talk about it more in part 7. This is part 7 of our study in Daniel chapter 7. Just talked about the schools of thought regarding this interpretation. It's either this prophecy is just happening in the first Roman Empire, just in the second Roman Empire, that world-dominating end times one, or in both. But we can disregard one, because it did happen in the first one, the first Roman Empire, so it can't happen in just the second one. And let's look at some history. So, Roman Empire, they're ruling and stuff. They go through Jesus' time and everything, and eventually they grow so big, Vandals start doing stuff, ransacking them, and they get divided into the West and the East. The Western Roman Empire turns into those 10 kingdoms, the 10 horns, and the Eastern is the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, which tramples 3 others. This is part 8 of our study in Daniel chapter 7. Just talked about the 10 kingdoms, which are the 10 horns, and the Byzantine Empire, which is the little horn, which uprooted 3 of the Western Roman Empire kingdoms, those 10 kingdoms. They're right here. We talked about what those 10 kingdoms are in our study of Daniel chapter 2. So if you haven't yet, check that out. But at this point, we got the prophecy, and we got the Roman Empire and the history of that. So there's not much else we can do. Are we going to be able to expect these prophecies in the new Roman Empire? Maybe. Maybe not. We'll just have to see. This prophecy could either be, this is what should happen in both Roman empires, the one that already happened, the one that will happen, or it could be, this will happen in the first Roman Empire, so when this empire revives and comes up again, you know that it's the bad boys. Part 9 of our study in Daniel chapter 7. So we've talked about the prophecy and the interpretations and what could happen in this new Roman Empire. But what we can take from this is, one, beasts represent kingdoms. We really need to understand that for Revelation chapter 13. But we know that the Roman Empire will be revived. And we'll talk about that more with Revelation chapter 13 in our study with that. So what are the takeaways? Not much. There's some prophecy stuff, and it happened. Yeah, it's cool. Daniel and God, the Holy Spirit, predicted all this stuff. Yay, cool. What does that mean for Revelation? Not much. But we will discover a lot of the connections and the prophecies in Revelation 13. If you like this new format of these videos, comment. But I love you guys. Peace.